Sophie had always been nervous about meeting her future mother-in-law, Evelyn. Evelyn was known for her grace, poise, and high expectations. She was the matriarch of a well-to-do family, and Sophie had heard many stories about her demanding nature. Despite this, Sophie was determined to make a good impression. On a bright Saturday morning, Sophie and her fiancé, James, arrived at Evelyn's grand estate for brunch. The house was a sprawling mansion, impeccably maintained, with a garden that looked like it belonged in a magazine. As they walked up to the entrance, Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. They were greeted at the door by an older woman dressed in a modest, yet elegant outfit. She had a warm smile and an air of familiarity about her. Sophie, trying to be polite and helpful, assumed she was a maid. "Hello," Sophie said with a friendly smile. "I'm Sophie. You must be the maid. Can you take these flowers and put them in a vase for me?" The woman's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, dear. Right this way." James looked mortified but didn't say anything immediately. As they followed the woman through the house, Sophie noticed that the decor was tasteful and elegant, with family portraits lining the walls. They were led to a beautiful dining room where Evelyn herself was waiting. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as she saw the resemblance between the woman who greeted them and Evelyn. "Sophie, this is my mother, Evelyn," James said, his voice strained. Sophie's face turned crimson as she realized her mistake. She had just asked her future mother-in-law, who she mistook for a maid, to arrange flowers for her. "I'm so sorry," Sophie stammered. "I didn't mean to." Evelyn raised a hand to stop her. "It's quite all right, Sophie," she said, her voice cool but not unkind. "It's an easy mistake to make. After all, I do pride myself on keeping my home in order." Sophie wanted the ground to swallow her up. She had made the worst possible first impression. The rest of the brunch was a blur as Sophie tried to recover from her faux pas. Evelyn was gracious, but there was an underlying tension that made Sophie feel even worse. After they left, Sophie burst into tears. "I've ruined everything," she sobbed. "She'll never accept me now." James hugged her tightly. "It's okay, Sophie. It was an honest mistake. My mom can be very down-to-earth despite her status. I'll talk to her." True to his word, James spoke with Evelyn. He explained how nervous Sophie had been and how much she wanted to make a good impression. Evelyn, having a soft spot for her son, decided to give Sophie another chance. A few weeks later, Sophie was invited back to the estate. This time, she made sure to recognize Evelyn immediately. They had a long, heartfelt conversation, and Sophie apologized profusely. Evelyn, seeing how sincere and kind Sophie was, forgave her. Over time, they grew close, and Evelyn came to see Sophie as the daughter she never had. Sophie, in turn, learned to admire Evelyn's strength and grace. The initial awkwardness was forgotten, and they became a loving family, united by their shared love for James. Sophie and James's wedding was a beautiful, fairy tale affair. Evelyn spared no expense, ensuring every detail was perfect. Despite the rocky start, Sophie and Evelyn had managed to build a respectful relationship. Yet, there was still an undercurrent of tension, as Sophie's independent spirit sometimes clashed with Evelyn's traditional expectations. After the honeymoon, Sophie and James moved into a charming house not far from Evelyn's estate. Evelyn frequently visited, offering advice on everything from home decor to dinner party etiquette. While Sophie appreciated her mother-in-law's experience, she often felt overwhelmed by her constant involvement. One evening, as Sophie was preparing dinner, Evelyn arrived unexpectedly. She took one look at Sophie's preparations and frowned. "Sophie, darling, you're doing it all wrong. Let me show you the proper way to prepare a roast." Sophie bit her tongue, feeling a mix of frustration and embarrassment. "Thank you, Evelyn, but I have my own way of doing things." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. "But James grew up with these recipes. He's accustomed to a certain standard." Sophie took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice calm. "I appreciate your concern, but James enjoys my cooking. We've talked about it. Evelyn pursed her lips, but said nothing more. As the weeks passed, these small clashes became more frequent. Evelyn's well-intentioned advice often felt like criticism, and Sophie's attempts to assert her independence were met with disapproval. The situation came to a head when Evelyn announced she was hosting a large family gathering at her estate and expected Sophie to help with the preparations. Sophie, who had already made plans with her own friends that weekend, politely declined. "I'm sorry, Evelyn, but I've already made other plans," Sophie said, trying to sound diplomatic. Evelyn's expression hardened. "This is an important event for the family, Sophie. I'm sure your friends will understand." Sophie stood her ground. "I understand the importance, but I've committed to my plans. I can help another time." Evelyn's face was a mask of controlled anger. "I see. Well, I hope you understand that family should come first." The days leading up to the event were tense. Evelyn made it clear she was displeased, and Sophie felt increasingly isolated. James tried to mediate, but he was caught in the middle, torn between his wife and his mother. On the day of the event, Sophie spent time with her friends, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. When she returned home, James was waiting for her, looking troubled. "Mom was really upset today," he said. "She feels like you're not willing to be part of the family." Sophie felt a surge of frustration. "James, I love your family, but I also need to have my own life and make my own decisions. I can't always do what your mom wants." James sighed. "I know, Sophie. I just wish we could find a way to make this work." Over the next few weeks, the tension between Sophie and Evelyn remained. However, a turning point came when Evelyn fell ill with a severe flu. Sophie, despite their differences, immediately stepped in to help. She took care of Evelyn, preparing meals and ensuring she was comfortable. Evelyn, touched by Sophie's kindness, began to see her daughter-in-law in a new light. She realized that Sophie's independence wasn't a rejection of the family, but rather a sign of her strength and self-reliance. Once Evelyn recovered, she invited Sophie over for tea. They had a heartfelt conversation, where both women expressed their feelings and concerns. Evelyn apologized for being overbearing, and Sophie acknowledged the challenges of fitting into a new family dynamic. From that day forward, their relationship improved significantly. Evelyn learned to give Sophie the space she needed, and Sophie made an effort to be more involved in family traditions. They found a balance, and their bond grew stronger, built on mutual respect and understanding. The fragile peace between Sophie and Evelyn lasted for a while, but the underlying tensions never fully disappeared. Sophie still struggled with Evelyn's expectations, and Evelyn found it hard to let go of her traditional values. One summer afternoon, the situation finally reached a breaking point. Evelyn, now fully recovered and back to her old self, decided to visit Sophie and James unannounced. She brought along a basket of laundry, explaining that her washing machine was being repaired and she needed a favor. "Sophie, dear," Evelyn said as she placed the basket in the laundry room. "Would you mind washing these for me? I know you have a good machine." Sophie, who was in the middle of a work project, felt her frustration boiling over. She had been trying to meet a deadline and didn't appreciate the interruption. "Evelyn, I'm really busy right now. Can it wait until later?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "I'm sure you can find a few minutes to help. After all, family comes first, doesn't it?" The condescending tone was the final straw. Sophie felt years of pent-up frustration and resentment burst forth. "I'm not your maid, Evelyn. I'm tired of you treating me like one." Evelyn gasped. "How dare you speak to me like that? I raised James with certain values, and I won't have you disrespecting me in my own son's home." Without thinking, Sophie slapped Evelyn across the face. The room fell silent as the sound of the slap echoed. Both women stood in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. At that moment, James walked in, having heard the commotion. He saw his mother holding her cheek, tears forming in her eyes, and Sophie standing there, her hand still raised. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. Evelyn turned to him, her voice trembling. James, she hit me. I only asked her for a small favor, and she hit me. James's eyes widened in disbelief. He looked at Sophie, searching for an explanation. Is this true, Sophie? Sophie, now realizing the gravity of her actions, stammered, James, she pushed me too far. I didn't mean to. James shook his head, his face a mixture of hurt and disappointment. I can't believe this. You've crossed a line, Sophie. I don't know if I can forgive this. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house was unbearable. James struggled to come to terms with what had happened. He loved Sophie, but he couldn't condone violence against his mother. Evelyn, meanwhile, made it clear that she could no longer feel safe around Sophie. Eventually, James made the painful decision to file for divorce. He and Sophie had a long, tearful conversation, where they both expressed their regrets and sadness. They realized that their differences, compounded by the toxic relationship with Evelyn, had become insurmountable. Sophie moved out, and the divorce was finalized within a few months. James, heartbroken and torn, tried to find solace in his work and family. Evelyn, while saddened by the divorce, felt a sense of vindication, though the slap had left a permanent scar on their family dynamic. Sophie, now living on her own, reflected on her actions and the events that led to the breakdown of her marriage. She sought therapy to work through her feelings, and vowed to never let her anger control her again. Years later, Sophie and James ran into each other by chance. They had a cordial conversation, both having moved on with their lives. Sophie apologized once more for her actions, and James, having had time to heal, forgave her. They parted ways with a sense of closure, understanding that sometimes love alone isn't enough to overcome deep-seated issues. In the end, the divorce was a painful lesson for both Sophie and James, but it allowed them to grow and find peace in their separate lives. Evelyn, too, learned to respect boundaries, albeit at a great cost. The family, though fractured, found a way to move forward, each member carrying the lessons of their shared past.